Today I want to talk about the importance that I see in drawing and painting around the house, or at least stopping a little bit to understand what's there, list a little bit of all the elements, for example, a kitchen, and understanding everything that you have on your kitchen, everything that a kitchen should have, and so on and so forth, so that you can, when you're designing a room or even sharpening your skills, you have a better understanding of everything, or getting some of the elements and organizing that to create a pleasant view. I talked about drawing objects in a previous video. I'll link this in the description. So it's interesting to see how we can learn a lot about cross hatching or value composition, value structure, element composition, geometry composition, as well as perspective drawing, and a lot of that from simple elements, and now growing that to simple rooms, simple environments, so that when you're getting to a stage, when you're doing a set design, it can be for a more realistic style or animation, you have that visual library, you have that understanding of the functionality of a place and how to put all of that together. I'm going to talk about everything that you're seeing on your screen. So those 4 steps: perspective and composition, values and hatching, growing more into this kind of organization that I said, materials and colors, so really understanding light, and for that, Color and Light by James Gurney is a great book to help, or Alla Prima by Richard Schmidt, and all the way to design and stylization, going into a more creative background. We're going to talk in the end of the video about this room that I designed back in the day. I have a time lapse of me drawing and gathering references for this room. So I want to talk a little about what I would do differently, and some of the aspects that I don't like about this, what I could have done better to improve readability, and so on. But without further ado, let's jump right in. Before we jump into perspective, I chose a tutorial and 2 books to discuss a bit. I want to talk about some tutorial sheets by Thomas Romain. Thomas, I don't know how to pronounce that. I love the understanding of structure here. I've been reading a book on the history of architecture recently, and plan views, such as we can see here in figure 1, they are really important to understand the organization of everything that you have on your scene. This is where even listing, I have 2 couches, I have furniture for a bookshelf or something like that, table, how many chairs, and light stand, and so on, so that I have a better understanding of what the whole room looked like. I can even do some kind of measuring here. So I have, I don't know, 3 meters, or if you are in feet, I think it's 9 feet, to really understand the room and put that down to paper. That will go a long way when you're designing like a temple or any kind of structure that has a functionality and you want to convey the believability in the architecture. So this is a very important part of the drawing process that I usually don't do, and we're going to see in the tutorial in the end, and I should do more. I should do better on that side. Once you have that drawn, you can put that in perspective. It can be through some of the methods that we are going to see in books like How to Draw, or even Frame Perspective 1, and put that into perspective, or use a tool in Photoshop, like a distort tool, and use guidelines, the perspective vanishing lines, to really fit that. Understanding scale here is going to be difficult, and all the distortions that we're going to have with different cameras. If we have a wide lens, for example, this is going to be way more distorted than if we have like a telescopic lens, and we're looking at this room from a real distance, but normally it's gonna be a normal like 50 mm lens, or the human eye that is approximately to that. And studying a lot of photos or studying from life will go a long way into developing your visual perception to what this looks like. Once you have that, you can start the elevate process, elevations, and that could be in 3D. Extrusion, if you are plotting this in 3D, and I highly encourage more digital artists to go into 3D. Blender or even SketchUp was a useful tool back in the day, so that you can extrude some of those boxes and really have an understanding volumetric of what the room is going to look like. And then finally is hard work, and we are also going to see a lot of that in the time lapse that I'm going to show in the end of the video. So if we jump right in, the first tutorial that I separated is the first tutorial I recommend on my video on to drawing for concept art, where I put together 52 tutorials from a foundation group. This one specifically from Matthew Zikry and John Park. I'll have all links for their portfolios in the description as well. And this first tutorial is all about primitives. So understanding how to put together and build this kind of primitives in perspective, understanding ellipses and how to use them in a volumetric space, and building on top of perspective grids so that you can have that volumetric approach. So you are elevating and populating your scene with a lot of simple primitive forms before you go into a lot of the details that we're going to see later on. A lot of the concepts behind these constructions you can find on both books. How to Draw will go more into complex volumes, so cars that are really hard to some extent to put together because of ellipses and understanding the central line that divides the symmetry in this vehicle, for example. So having a grasp on that will go a long way if you're building something that is mostly symmetrical here. But Scott Robertson also talks a lot about construction in perspective for environments. So it's interesting, but for environment specifically, if you have to go with just one book, I would go with Frame Perspective 1. It's very practical. And I have videos here for both books talking more about their index and their content and giving a little bit of a guide on how to study this. Once you have done that and you understand a little more the construction, it's time to really draw from life. I love this drawing by Paul Heaston. Paul Heaston has a little bit of a wide lens, so you're gonna see more of a distorted perspective in most of his drawings. So it's different. It's not only his eye, but he's building on top of that and distorting a little bit to put more things into the frame. And that would happen if you're using a wide lens in a camera, fisheye lens or something like that. So this will go a long way in understanding composition, as we talked about in the objects video, but it will go also a long way into understanding values and how to connect values so that you have a better understanding of the overall scene. Hatching will also go a long way. It's not the case here. He is using mostly, I think, markers for the values and even the white values with a white pen or something like that. But he also does a lot of hatching in other arts that I've seen, and I highly recommend looking at his Instagram right here. If we jump to Jung Gi, Jung Gi used to do that a lot as well, drawing from his imagination, but as well from life, from what's around him. A lot of fisheye lenses as well, as you're gonna see. So try starting with a simple perspective, a more less distorted perspective, and you can grow all the way to this kind of stuff. You can populate that with hatching or with a lot of detail, as this is the case, and a little bit of value here and there to really organize. In my drawing, I didn't organize with values, and that is really harmful to the overall readability of the content. You can isolate items, so understanding how to build staircases, understanding auxiliary vanishing points, because something that is inclined in a scene will converge to a vanishing point above the horizon line. So understanding this kind of constructions will go also a long way. Both frame perspective 1 and how to draw discuss this topic. So it's interesting to take a look. When we start going more into value, whole value structure, so you're not simplifying with hatching, you have to understand more about lighting and how to really convey realism. Books like Color and Light will go a long way, as well as tutorials from the Foundation group. This is Paul Felix. Most of these are from Imagination for movies, such as Lilo and Stitch and other animation features that he has worked on. But it's interesting to see already the usage of all the elements that you can find on a kitchen to put together in something that is really, really interesting. We want to dive deeper and look at all the small details that we have here, and it gives life. It brings a lot of believability, but in a warm way. It's bringing really character to this environment, storytelling to this environment. And a lot of that is set design for movies. A lot of the storytelling elements will convey through environments, and that's what I want to point out later on in the stylization and design, but we can also start seeing that here. Organization of value structure, so that what's next to you has darker as well as lighter values, and when you go into distance, you put all of them more into one only value or less value, so that you can create a little bit of a atmospheric perspective and depth in your drawings and paintings. Jumping to the next part, that is materials and colors. I've separated this great scene. It's from a hotel room by John Singer Sargent, but it's a great study. He used to do a lot of those. You can find a lot of tables and interiors from him, trying to understand what light looks like, what colors look like in different materials and different lighting situations. This is really close to what we've discussed in the Color and Light book study guide, as well as the overall book review that I did. It's going to be really important to understand some of those values, some of those materials and reflections and all of that, to really have something that is believable, even if you're drawing something that goes more into stylization. Having this realistic background and doing a lot of studies, still life studies, as I discussed in the objects and furniture, you will learn piece by piece and then put it all together in a bigger, more complex scene. We can look at this one, and it's funny that this tutorial by Foundation Group also discusses like basic lighting methods, using mostly tools from Photoshop and blending modes and multiply layers and so on and so forth. But here is an oil painting, so the understanding of the overall value structure that you want to convey, to really have this lighting part be important in the scene and bring a bit of the composition to the figures. I love this other study here by Nicolas Uribe from a bathroom. Who would think that a simple like how's normal bathroom would look so pretty in a painting. He does a lot of this life studies. He has an amazing channel here on YouTube. I'll link in the description. It's called Our Painted Lives. So that's great that he's bringing his environment, the people around him, even like pets and all of that, and studying from them, trying to convey beauty. He was also featured in my video about finding beauty on the ordinary, and this is why he's looking differently at something that we can think is ordinary, but bringing a lot of value to that. And Van Gogh also did that in this painting of a room. So this is very famous painting, and it comes from something that is definitely simple. Finally, but not last but not least kind of situation, we're going to talk about design and stylization. I love this room by Tsutsumi for Monsters University, if I'm not mistaken. The light coming from the windows, we've seen this in other videos as well, this same image. So understanding how all these colors and these values will work and these materials will work in a lighting situation that is not a direct light, it's more of a window light. And we have a specific part in Color and Light by James Gurney talking about window light. So it's really a combination of a life of studies bringing realism in a stylized situation for an animation movie. So it's very, very interesting to see. We can see the same here in a simple drawing by John Park, something that is abandoned, destroyed, and really conveys the believability of the whole environment. And this kind of simple isometric works are really important for the concept art industry, so that we can have a very straightforward understanding of everything that we have in the scene, how characters would go about walking around in a scene like this, and it will simplify as well the life of the 3D artists down the line on the pipeline, the production pipeline, that will get this to a final video game or something like that. We have the same situation here with John Sweeney for The Last of Us. We also have seen this room changed a little bit to the TV series. So it's interesting to see as well how it all started, how it's pictured in the game. So it had some changes here and there for the final version of the game that comes from the 3D environment people changing bits and pieces. And bringing their own personality at some point to the whole experience of the scene, as well as what they did in the final set design for the TV series. Some other interesting examples. I love Armand work, and a lot of that goes into the thought process and even making notes that I said before, understanding what you can find in a normal bathroom and how to convey that in an animation movie that is very stylized. What kind of elements, what can you change from elements? We've seen this done by Corey Lofties as well in the video about objects and furniture. So definitely check that out, because there is a lot of things that you can design on top of what's out there. I would highly encourage looking at museums, furniture museums. I've seen an amazing exposition. I think it was about the early 1900s in Vienna. So a lot of Art Nouveau starting out and a lot of explorations in design. So we can definitely learn a lot of that. You have the Louvre, where you have Napoleon rooms still trying to convey what they looked like back in the day. So learning from a lot of different sources. Your house is the starting point, but grow that to really understand how can you change, how can you design on top of that. Fernando Peque, also a great artist. I love this kitchen, very warm environment, a lot of life, as we've seen with Paul Felix before as well. So another example of how simple can be beautiful and bring a lot of storytelling to the scene. There is an exercise suggested by Fengzu School, FZD, to design the room of a teenager that is very interested into something really specific. This is a student work, so Feilong Yang is a student from FZD. So great work here, great display of the organization, the plan views that we discussed before, and how to build set design on top of that to create a livable storytelling, complex set design and environment. So I'll add a link to the description with a lot of other studies from students so that you can take a look and even try that yourself, maybe using your room as a basis. If you are a teenager, that's going to be simpler to some extent that you can understand. But other than that, like trying to understand functionality, as I said before, and then growing on top of that to really design and what's different. Last but not least, Victoria Ying. She has a great tutorial course actually on schoolism. I'll have a link in the description. Amazing one on there is 1 week on set design using a lot of Blender as well. SketchUp as well. So great work. I think this is for Tango. And Helen Chen down here with the Frankenstein house design, set design. Once again, in something that is almost an isometric view to convey functionality, to convey everything that is on that room in one image. So this is a very interesting study. Even looking at this, trying to replicate that, learning from this, and then growing on top of your house, the rooms on that, or even designs that you're doing for something that is more complex. If one message could be done, and we're going to see that in my video in a bit, is that start from simple, start from objects, as I said before, and then grow to more and more complex and design environments. So let's jump right in and look at my time lapse and discuss a little bit what I could have done differently to really convey more of this life in the room, as well as organize values and readability. So the first mistake I think I have here is not planning out. I started with an idea and I wanted to do a room for someone that is into botanics or is studying botanics or vegetation as a whole. So I started straight away without planning. I started from a photo. Nowadays I would start from a 3D, so I have more control. I would have planned out, as I said before, in a plan view to understand all the elements that are going into the scene, or even sketched out to understand previously everything that's gonna go. One example is the end of the room. We see a wall with what would be a painting at that point, and that's gonna turn into a window later on. So I went for more the construction approach, so blocking in, as we said, the primitives and the staircase, adding a little bit of detail, but I was gonna change the line later on. So using a simple line, using a lot of tools in Photoshop to really help construct the overall scene. But a lot of simple boxes all over the place in the first pass, and then a second pass designing more of the elements using a lot of reference. So what the table is gonna look like, what the overall furniture is gonna look like, the chairs, couches, and so on, the lamp in there, the carpets. And for the carpets, we're going to see that I used a plan view later on. We'll get to that in a bit. it's easier to use the distort tool and put that in place. So the window now changing. I love the reference that I had there, but I didn't look at a lot of reference doing here's the carpet in a plan view using symmetry and then throwing that on the ground. But I didn't look at a lot of the reference really pointing out and making notes of what's there so that I can sketch with a more informed approach. I didn't like the lines on the floor because they were getting the eye too much to the end of the room. That is not very interesting. I would love to drive the eye to the side of the image, the right side of the image. That's why I changed the tiling in the texture. So that's an interesting solution to bring that on. But a lot of try and error. We can see some of that in here. And now I'm using a white layer on top to have more of a volumetric understanding as well as a 2D aspect of what could go into that scene and bring more of a foreground instead of having all the elements back then. And now it's time to jump into details. If I've done what Thomas Homain does that I explained in the beginning of the video, this would be part 4, but I kind of jumped over part 1 specifically. I jumped right into part 2 without a lot of planning. And then I started elevating everything. So it's part 2 combined with part 3. And now part 4 is on top of one line that I went straight with the first line. I didn't explore other ways to convey the same scene, to convey the same elements. What storytelling am I bringing? It's mostly set design without a thought behind it. I love drawing details, and that's what I did here. So drawing a lot of details and even over detailing the scene. So readability loses a lot of its impact without the thought process. The biggest mistake I think I did here, and it's something that I'm starting to realize now and I'm going to try and correct down the line, is scale. So having a 3D model or having a photo underlay that have a lot of figures in it, or at least some figures in different places on the scene, would help a lot. So the staircase is very hard to really convey the scale, the right scale. So planning more would be really important at that point. And even the size of doors, windows, objects, furniture, and all of that, that's what's going to convey believability down the line. And it's something that I didn't do here very well. And I still think that there are a lot of elements that are out of scale. And I should have changed that in the beginning instead of the end. There is some fine-tuning in the end, but in all drawings, all illustrations, and so on. But a lot of planning previously and understanding of spaces, understanding of functionality of architecture and how people move inside a place will go a long way into making your drawings better. Details take time, and this is something that I want to point out here. So take your time, do it slowly, stop a little bit, look at other references. Don't go with the first reference that you find that makes sense. Even like this vase, I went with the first design that I found. I added the generic umbrella inside it and so on. So really take your time here. Yeah, I'm plotting down the structure for the scale, trying to think what figure would look like. And then the door was too big, but now I think it's too small, which makes the scene, the overall living room too wide. And that's not planning in its best way to really convey. So that's basically it. So final details here and there just to make everything look interesting and believable. Not thinking too much about composition, a little bit, so driving the eye with details, but a value pass over here would go a long way into really connecting the dots. and making everything interesting. So that's it. That's my time lapse. I hope you learned something. If you enjoyed the video, you probably will enjoy my other one on objects and furniture. I hope you watched that before this one. But I hope to see you all in another video down the line.